Now, for more on that story, I'm joined by Khalili Janshah, Professor Khalili Janshah, Professor of International Studies and Languages at Pepperdine University and former President of the National Association of Arab Americans in Washington, D.C. Professor Janshah, welcome to the program. We're witnessing some fast developments in Lebanon. Hezbollah has agreed to hand over 2 Israeli soldiers in exchange for 5 Lebanese prisoners, and perhaps more exchanges in the next 2 weeks, according to Hezbollah's leader. What is driving these developments? I mean, why now?
I think what is driving these developments are internal developments both in Israel and Lebanon. On the Israeli side, there is a very weak government, a prime minister that has been haunted by all kinds of investigations pertaining to some corruption over the past couple of years. And that has weakened the government in Israel and has increased the pressure by the parents of the prisoners, the Israeli prisoners, and the movement that has evolved around them to kind of increase the pressure on a weakened prime minister to move forward in striking this deal. On the Lebanese side, of course, you have the dynamics of the internal debate taking place in Lebanon with regard to the future government, the emerging government in Lebanon. And certainly it is in Hezbollah's interest to move forward with an agreement of this sort that definitely strengthens the hand of Hezbollah.
So I presume you agree to the notion that Israel's approval of these prisoner swaps is a tactic by the Israeli establishment to perhaps distract public attention from the allegations of corruption which have recently overshadowed Mr. Olmert's career as prime minister.
Definitely. I think that's the main objective on the Israeli side. There might be another hidden objective, if you will, aside from detracting attention from the corruption charges against the prime minister. It's also all the machinations of kind of political conspiracies within the coalition, within the Kadima coalition party that's governing in Israel to try to push Olmert out and move him out of the way, if you will. So all of these, I think, have contributed to the impetus, if you will, of the Israeli government to move forward with this agreement. But I believe that the agreement is significant in a variety of ways. I think it's significant domestically in Israel, but it's also significant domestically in Lebanon. And it's also significant regionally. I mean, there are some unprecedented components to this agreement that will come back to influence Lebanese politics, Israeli politics, and Palestinian politics in the future. Israel has agreed to do certain things that it has not done in the past. One, for example, is Israel's unwillingness traditionally to deal with so-called terrorist groups. That basically shatters this myth or this claim by Israel and the United States, which usually mimics that claim that we do not deal with so-called terrorist groups. Yet, when it's in Israel's interest, then Israel goes ahead and deals with these groups that are on its terrorist list or on the international terrorist list. The same thing, I think, applies in terms of, first of all, releasing all the prisoners. This is the first time in a long time, if ever, that Israel releases prisoners and remains of prisoners. In terms of like the total release of prisoners belonging to one neighboring country. That has never happened before. So I think this is apt to strengthen Hezbollah internally in Lebanon, to strengthen Hezbollah regionally in the face of criticism that Hezbollah has faced over the past year, particularly since the 2006 war that many people in the Arab world were not happy with. So I think Hezbollah will come out the winner, if you will, from this arrangement.
Professor Janshah, let's turn to Lebanon for a moment and the coalition government which is yet to be formed. What are the main impediments holding back the formation of the unity government?
Well, the formation of the unity government has been hindered by basically competing demands on both sides. Both sides have kind of held some tough positions in terms of not willing maybe to share in the number of seats or on the quality, if you will, of the cabinet positions that have been offered to each side. So it's kind of, on the one hand, it's the traditional Lebanese differences over who controls what. in the country. So it's a conflict over the limited resources, if you will, of a small country where each side would like to expand its control over the decision-making process and the governing process in the country. So I believe that has been the main difficulty that the Prime Minister designate, Senora, has been facing over the past few weeks. It seems that over the past few days there has been some opening, and there are some hopes in Lebanon that were heard today that maybe the release of the prisoners will create such enthusiasm in Lebanon and would bring all these differing parties maybe closer to strike a deal on the formation of the next government.
Mr. Senora has been reappointed as Lebanon's prime minister. The opposition has made its dissatisfaction clear, saying it was against the spirit of the Doha Accord, and the Christian opposition leader Michel Aoun has warned that Senora's nomination is a recipe for conflict rather than reconciliation. In this climate, what are Mr. Senora's odds of success?
Well, I think his odds to success are 50-50 at best. But again, I mean, these criticism from the Aoun camp are not the only criticism. You hear also similar criticism from the majority saying Aoun's participation in the government is a non-starter. So if either party, any one of these parties would take these types of maximalist position, then the chances of Mr. Senora to form the next government would even diminish way below the 50-50. But if parties show, I think, better goodwill, more goodwill in terms of trying to accommodate each other, I think we should see a new government in Lebanon over the next few weeks.
Khalili Janshah, Professor of International Studies at Pepperdine University, thank you for appearing on the show.
My pleasure.